So without further ado, let's please welcome Chip Fitchner. Thank you for being here, Chip. And everyone stand up. Let's keep that going. Let's keep that energy going. Let's stand up.
You just want them to stretch.
Blaming all on my roots. I showed up in boots.
Good morning, doctors. It is a beautiful day in San Diego. For those of you who have not yet looked out the window, you'll notice that a number of those big gray boats are leaving, which bothers me. What we're going to talk about today are what we call invisible dental support organizations. There are a couple of different types of dental support organizations, and we like the invisible dental support organizations because they functionally become a doctor's silent partner by purchasing anywhere from 51 to 90% of a practice for cash up front. The doctors continue to lead the practice with the doctor's brand, team, strategy, and full autonomy, and that full autonomy is a key part of this. These groups that are going to invest millions of dollars and become your partner have no desire to micromanage or homogenize your practice to fit some sort of corporate identity. They want you to continue to be successful doing whatever you've been doing that has made you successful enough for them to give you millions and millions of dollars. So we're going to go into this in detail. Keep in mind that an invisible DSO partnership is not a retirement strategy. It's not a transition strategy. There are probably 25% of the transactions that we'll do this year are for doctors in their 30s. Younger doctors are beginning to realize that the invisible DSOs can become great partners to reduce their administrative headaches, help them with marketing, help them with recruiting, and give them more family time with their young kids. That's been a really big trend change. Last year of our $600 million of transactions, over $100 million were for doctors in their 30s. So this is no longer a situation where doctors only consider a DSO partnership or a DSO sale when they're in their 50s or their 60s. And I'm 63 years old, and so you're going to hear me picking on old people here very shortly, because if you're a doctor who is got a 6 in front of his age, the value of your practice is going down every single day, even if you're growing. Now that's a horrible thing to say, but it is the reality. There are multiple invisible DSOs out there today that will not bid on a doctor with a 6 in front of his age. So that reduces the number of bidders and therefore ultimately does not help the value of your practice. This is a good example of what happened last year. This year we have achieved actually higher values than we did in 2022. We have more bidders for our clients today than we did a year ago. And that's the reason is because there are more invisible DSOs out there today than there were a year ago. So there were 14 invisible DSOs that focused on orthodontic practices only. That has been supplemented by, today there are now 10 Dental Trifecta invisible DSOs. Dental Trifectas are those which seek to partner with pedo, ortho, and oral surgery in the same community. And the largest owner or partner with orthodontic practices today are a couple of the multispecialty invisible DSOs. There are multispecialty invisible DSOs that have more orthodontic practice partners than any of the ortho-only groups, and keep in mind there are 14, other than Smile Doctors. So doctors today have multiple options in partnership. We generally won't take a client unless we can identify that at least 6 qualified bidders for that practice. And we've had transactions in the last 90 days where doctors had 12 and in some cases 15 different qualified bidders to choose from. Now having multiple qualified bidders is a good thing, but the value of it is not so much that drives up the price or the value of the transaction, but it gives you more options in partnership. I'm going to run real quick through what our team looks like and our advisory board. Interesting guy here, Admiral Davidson, who not that long ago was based here in San Diego and got promoted to be head of what's called Indo-PACOM. He's a little busy this week. There's a lot happening in the Navy this week. Mitch Olin. Mitch Olin is the co-founder of one of the largest invisible DSOs in the country that's been around for 35 years. Mitch just retired from that, and he is now sitting on the board of multiple invisible DSOs. Bhavik Patel is a nationally known tax expert. One of our jobs is to make sure that the transactions that we structure for our clients are tax efficient, and Bhavik helps us do that. Many people think that for some reason we're small. We're not. We have 30 some odd full-time employees working across the country, and we continue to grow. This chart here is a chart of the growth of dental revenues. That's about a 50-year chart. And as you can see in the green line, you have had consistent, reliable growth in dental collections, which is why we have so many new investors pouring into the dental consolidation game. Just in the last 12 months, there has been almost $10 billion invested in dental practice consolidation in the US. Now, that's a lot of money. Now, the good news is that has offset via new investment in an existing invisible DSO or the startup of new invisible DSOs has offset the issues that many of the invisible DSOs are facing due to interest rates. This chart is interesting. The red lines in this chart represent when that group did a recapitalization. A recapitalization is when the investor monetizes the investment they've made to grow the group, and they monetize the doctor's investment if the doctor wants to. In this particular case, I know a doctor who partnered with this particular group. He took $1 million in equity in December of 2000, and he saw his equity grow in value, and he finally monetized it after they had had 3 different recapitalizations where he could have sold part of his equity or all of his equity, and instead he hung on to it, and over a 17-year period, 17-year period, his $1 million was worth $151 million, and he cashed out and took his $151 million. And that is the power of compounding growth in these businesses. There are early guys in Smile Doctors who have made 15 times their money in less than 8 years. And that is fortunately something that actually happens. Now, one of the things that doctors are often surprised about is the number of invisible DSOs that are out there. Today, there are somewhere north of 1,194 DSOs. Some of these are invisible, some of these are the branded guys, but they are growing. The ADA came out with a report last quarter that says that orthodontists are the most consolidated of all dental practice types. The ADA says that 18% of you either work for a DSO or have partnered with an invisible DSO, versus 11% for pedo and 13% for GP. So it's changing. So let's talk about the basic math of why invisible DSOs exist and why they are able to pay record values to invest in great practices like yours. And the answer is functionally arbitrage. Your practice is worth a number, let's call it 7 times EBITDA. And as a group, as these groups get bigger, they can monetize their group due to the size that they are at roughly twice that number. Last year, the most valuable invisible DSO, about a year ago today, or a year ago last week, recapitalized at a 20 times EBITDA value. That is the highest record deal done, and that deal was valued at about $2 billion, and fortunately, over half of the practices in that group were my clients. Happy guys. So let's look at some of the big recapitalizations that occurred in 2022. This is relevant to you because ultimately you're either going to compete with a bunch of invisible DSOs or you're going to join one. It's inevitable. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Doctors will do great competing with these guys because functionally you're smaller and smarter and you can beat them, but they are fierce competitors, and we'll talk about why in a second. So we talked about age, and every practice, no matter how old the doctor is sellable. We did a deal recently for a 79-year-old doctor. The reason we were able to do that is we went and found him a 35-year-old associate that made him sellable. There are functionally 3 different types of DSOs. The first are the branded DSOs that you will see, such as Aspen, and they're on just about every corner, and Pacific Dental Services, and there are dozens and dozens of them. The invisible DSOs you don't really see because they do not change your brand. Smile Doctors started out changing the brands of their practices, and when they got a new CEO a couple of years later, they stopped doing that. So they became an invisible DSO after starting as a branded DSO. You'll also see both types of groups growing through de novos. So number one myth that I have to address with every single doctor that I ever talk to is, do I really get to keep my autonomy? I like being my own boss. I like not having somebody telling me what to do. If I partner with these guys, are they going to tell me what to do? And so the way we dispel that myth is, as our doctors go through our process, they get to talk to other doctors that are within the group that they are considering as a finalist. And they're going to have a doctor-to-doctor conversation, nobody else on the phone, where the doctor who has joined the particular group that you're interested in joining will tell you what life is like. And they will confirm in every case that these groups have no desire to tell you what to do. They want you to be successful, they want you to be happy, and they want you to grow. But they are not going to tell you who to hire, who to fire, what payers to take, what products to use, when to be open, when to take a vacation. That's not their model, because you are the golden goose. You lay the golden eggs. And frankly, if they piss you off, you can leave. And they have then just wasted the millions and millions of dollars they gave you. So we go through a very definitive process to prove to our clients that you will not lose your autonomy with the DSO that you the invisible DSO that you choose. Now, the interesting thing is the growth in dental consolidation is not coming from the branded DSOs. Yes, Aspen's building 100 new practices a year, and yes, Heartland is building 100 new practices a year. But the reality is the growth in dental consolidation is virtually all the invisible DSOs, the new ones that are being formed. And there's a new invisible DSO being formed about every 2 weeks last year. This year, it's probably about one a month. Interest rates have hurt the formation of new invisible DSOs. You know, in the basic concept of an invisible DSO partnership, the doctor is going to agree to stay for a minimum period of time. Now, you could say, look, I only want to do a deal where I leave in a year. That is doable, but there's a direct correlation between value and how long you want to stay. I was talking to a doctor this morning, was asking about the duration of the commitment by the doctor, and I said the most valuable doctors are the young doctors who say to the prospective partners, you know, I love doing orthodontics. I really would like to have a partner who could reduce some of my administrative burden or do all of that magic marketing that Kyle was talking about for me. But I love doing what I do, and I see myself doing this for the rest of my life. And so the doctors who say that are going to get higher values than the doctors who come to me and go, okay, I'll work 5 years, but I'd rather make it 3. And I'm like, let's be honest with the potential partner of what you really want, because we want to get you what's appropriate for what you really want. So the best answer to that question is always doctors who say, I would love to do this forever. That gets a little tough when you have a 6 in front of your age. Now keep in mind, all of these groups are very, very different. There is some false belief in the dental community that all invisible DSOs or DSOs are backed by private equity. And if you think that, you're missing about 40% of the groups that are out there, and some of the best ones are not backed by private equity. They're backed by sovereign wealth funds, they're backed by family offices, they're backed by SBICs. This is not a business that is only backed by private equity. I don't know why every doctor thinks that, and hell, half my competitors seem to think that as well. But we have done hundreds of millions of dollars in the last 2 years with non-private equity backed invisible DSOs. Frankly, we really like dealing with the family office-backed invisible DSOs because fortunately, there's one guy who's typically the guy who made the billions of dollars in the family office who's making the decisions. We did a deal, we did 110 practices with a family office-backed invisible DSO that we helped start about 4 years ago. And that multi-billionaire and I got in his jet and we went and met every single doctor that he partnered with before he partnered with them. And the great thing about that, rather than private equity, which is a bunch of committees that are running somebody else's money, this is a guy who's writing his own checks out of his own pocket, and he makes decisions like that. One of my favorite deals was we went to see a big pedo practice in Salt Lake City, 23 offices. We sat down in front of the doctor's office. The investor asked a few questions of the doctor, and he says, okay, we need to make a deal. We need you, we want you. I'm not leaving this office until we've agreed to terms. That's the kind of guys I like to do business with. Whereas the private equity groups, you have committees who make decisions, and they can be very slow and very painful. And one of the things you have to watch out for today is what I call the retraders. There are a number of doctors out there that I talk to on a regular basis who have done deals by themselves without an advisor, and an invisible DSO has come to them and put their arm around them and brought them to the headquarters, and they've drank whiskey together, and they've got a very low offer. And what's happening today, partially due to changes in interest rates, is the groups are saying, yeah, doc, we're going to do a deal. The value of your practice is $10 million. They go through the due diligence process, which is extraordinarily painful, by the way, and they go through the audit, and then they come back to the doc and go, well, now that we've audited your practice, we're going to have to change our offer. We're going to reduce it from $10 million to $8.5 million, but that's only because the audit said we had to do that, which is, in most cases, cheating and a lie. But it's happening a lot right now. And I mean, when I say right now, like in the last 120 days. Now, let's talk about the benefits of an invisible DSO partnership. Frankly, every doctor does these transactions for different reasons. One of the great things about an invisible DSO partnership is that the cash that you receive as a part of the transaction is going to be taxed at long-term capital gains tax rates, which are only 20% federal at the moment. And I'm willing to bet anybody in this room a whole lot of money that 3 years from now, that long-term capital gains tax rate is going to be much, much higher than 20%. We'll see. Now, in these transactions, the doctor is going to sell for cash up front anywhere between 51 and 90% of the value of his practice, and that cash that they receive at closing, again, is taxed at long-term capital gains tax rates. The other reasons that doctors do these transactions will vary, and they're going to vary based on your goals, and they're going to vary based on the options in partnership that you have. The current high bidders for ortho practices are the Dental Trifecta Invisible DSOs. The Dental Trifecta DSOs can be very powerful for your practice because their goal will be to buy as many pediatric practices around you as they can so that they can create referrals to your practice to help your practice grow. And they're also going to be acquiring or partnering with oral surgery practices in your community so that both you and the pediatric practice can refer to the oral surgery practice. So the rapid growth of the invisible DSOs, and again, all of this growth is invisible DSOs, not branded DSOs, but look at those numbers. Can you imagine going from 37 offices to 500 offices in 60 months? And that particular group has done it exceptionally well. We sold them office number 38 once they had institutional capital. That was in October of 2017, so about 6 years ago. That group today is well over 600 practices, and in the meantime, we have partnered dozens of our clients with that group. After putting our clients through a bidding process, that group right there has never been the high bidder for any of our practices. The doctors who have joined that group did it for the cultural fit for them. So, big growth. Dental trifectas. The value of a dental trifecta is you do something that no other invisible DSO can do, which is you create internal growth. So in the case of that 23 office pedo practice in Salt Lake City, we had already partnered the investor, the invisible DSO, with multiple orthodontic practices within referral distance of that pediatric group. We had also partnered them with an oral surgery group that was within referral distance of the 23 office pediatric practice. So once the pediatric practice joined the family, all of the orthos who were already in the family saw obviously a significant growth rate due to the referrals. Because once you're in a dental trifecta, you're going to, in effect, get compensated for your referrals because you own equity in the parent company, as does the pediatric practice, as does the oral surgery practice. So everybody's eager to refer to each other, and as you add additional practices into that cluster, you're lifting the boat for everybody because those new practices that join the cluster are going to start referring to the practices that are within the family. So in that example, we went from the investor buying 7 orthos from us in the same week, added a pedo practice, added an oral surgery practice also the same week. 23 offices of pedo, and then to put a cherry on top, we sold them the 2 largest oral surgery practices in that state, which combined had 13 oral surgeons and 13 offices within referral distance. So they went from 0 offices in that city to 48 offices in that city in 9 months. Now, what was magic about that is we went back and looked at it a year after the oral surgery group was added in, and the average practice out of those 48 saw a 20% plus internal growth rate without spending marketing dollars. And when you can create internal growth rates, you increase the value of the invisible DSO when it comes time to monetize the overall group. Now, the demographic shifts are really interesting, and they're happening all the time. I had 3 dinners this week in Washington, D.C. with a client of ours who is a very, very large oral surgery practice, who's growing rapidly. The oldest doc in the practice is 45. And so, again, younger doctors are more valuable, but the winning dinner group, so what we do in our process is you become our client, we're gonna bring you 6, 8, 10, 12 bidders that you're going to have a conversation with, and we're going to get offers from those groups. And after we have those offers, we're going to sit down with you and say, okay, we've had 10 or 12 conference calls with interested parties. We've told you the details about who they are and what they are. Who should we invite to dinner? So we will typically invite 3 to 4 of those groups to come do an after-hours practice tour and dinner with you and us, so that they can see what they're interested in, and you get to meet the personalities of the senior executives. In this case, the CEOs of the 4 invisible DSOs were all at dinner this week. I only did 3 of them. One of my partners did the 4th dinner, but it was really interesting how different all these groups were and how the doctors reacted to them. But it changes. So the winning bidder, I think, from this week will be a group that had never done a deal east of the Rockies. And their new CEO in January called me up and said, Chip, I've got a $400 million budget to acquire practices in the next 2 years. What should I do? And I was like, well, you don't want to stay just west of the Rockies. It's time to come east. So we'll complete for him this year, not including the one from this week, somewhere around $50 million worth of transactions that will all be on the east coast of the US. And this is a group that had never crossed the Rockies before. Point of that being is that all of these transactions and these groups change what they're doing, what they're paying, where they want to be, and what their strategies are. And unless you know that, you don't get to see all of your opportunities. And it's important to see all of your opportunities. So liquidity is important. If your collections are flat or down, it's going to impact your value, right? So if you continue to see a declining practice, it may or may not be the time to do this type of transaction. And I realize that ortho case starts last year were down about 8%. That's national average, but I can tell you my clients last year, ortho case starts for them were up last year. So it's all about your practice and what you want to do. Now, recruiting against the invisible DSOs is becoming more difficult. It's less of a challenge for orthos than it is for the oral surgeons. So, quick story on oral surgery recruiting. There were 247 graduates from the oral surgery residency programs in June of 23. Over 100 of those went to the invisible DSOs. 27 of them went into public service. So roughly, there were 100 oral surgery residency graduates available to be recruited by the 5,000 independent oral surgery practices in the US. Now, if you were going to decide you want to go recruit somebody, you had to compete with the invisible DSOs and the branded DSOs. At the Amos Oral Surgery Conference 3 weeks ago, right here in San Diego, Aspen had a big booth. They said $750,000 per year, first year guarantee if you're an oral surgeon and come work for Aspen. And that was on top of a signing bonus, debt forgiveness, blah, 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 blah. But the one thing Aspen couldn't offer these guys was equity in the invisible DSO. And that's why the invisible DSOs kicked Aspen's ass in the recruiting game, because the invisible DSOs were basically able to say to the doctor, sure, we'll give you the $500,000 a year guarantee, and yeah, we'll give you the $100,000 signing bonus, but we're going to give you something that no other doctor in this country is going to be able to give you, which is equity in our group. And here's the chart of the value of our equity over the last 5 years, and we expect that to continue because our new investor is a multi-trillion-dollar hedge fund. or a private equity firm or a family office. And when I say trillion, they're trillions. BlackRock just dipped their toe into U.S. dental consolidation with a little $1.5 billion investment in the fourth quarter of last year. They manage $10 trillion. They're the world's largest money manager, and they just got into U.S. dental consolidation. So it's changing. So the invisible DSO benefits really vary based on what you want. If you're a younger doctor and you want more time with your family, they're going to take over some of the administrative burdens. If you're an older doctor and you're going to need help recruiting an associate in the near future, they can be very helpful. A lot of the reason doctors do these transactions today young is because the multiplication factor of the equity. If you start with $1 million in equity and that group recapitalizes and creates a 3 times return on your equity, and then they do it again and again, in 15 years, your $1 million in equity became worth $27 million. And this is not fantasy math. We had over 100 of our clients participate in recapitalizations in the last 120 days of 2022. Now, the high return for our clients in those recapitalizations was a doctor who was an orthodontist, actually, who had joined a group. He kept $5 million in equity out of a $17 million transaction. $12 million of that was in cash that he got at closing. And he told me at closing, he said, look, this $5 million is funny money to me. He said, the $12 million in cash that I got was far more than I thought my whole practice was worth. And we had a great bidding contest for him, but he kept $5 million in equity in October of 19, and in September of 22, his partner recapitalized, and his $5 million in equity at that point was worth $35 million. Not a bad trade for 35 months. So part of the reason is the money. You got to understand who your potential partner is. There are some good ones out there, there are some bad ones out there, and there's some really bad ones out there. Now, fortunately, no major invisible DSO in the last 35 years has failed, but it's coming. You have to choose wisely, and the critical thing is understanding the capital structure of your potential partner and understanding who is behind the invisible DSO, who's the money, who's the credit. You need to understand that, or it could be not a good thing. So the timing of these things is really kind of interesting. So we did a transaction for a doctor who came to me a year and a half ago. And he called me up. We had done his numbers. He was not a client. Nice guy. He said, Chip, I know I'm not your client, but I'm about to sign a letter of intent with this group, and I just wanted to get a sanity check to see if you thought they were a good group or a bad group. I was like, absolutely, happy to help you, but if I help you, you owe me referrals to your friends. He's like, done. So I said, before you tell me who it is, on how much the bid is, I want you to tell me how many bidders you had. How many people did you talk to on trying to do this transaction by yourself? And he said, well, only one. He said, a couple of my classmates and my buddies went to this group. I really liked them, and the CEO, we've drank whiskey together, and I really like these guys. I want to go with them. I'm like, okay, but you had no other bidders. He's like, no. I said, all right, tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to guarantee you in writing that I can get you at least $5 million more than whatever your offer is, or you can pay me nothing. And we'll take you through the agonizing process of due diligence and closing and legal and all that, and we'll do all that for free. He's like, you don't know the number. That's crazy. I said, I'll put it in writing. So I sent him an email while he was on the phone. He tells me who it is. I know the bidder because we'd sold him 3 practices in the last 120 days, and the bid was $19 million. And I said, well, doctor, now that I know the bidder and now that I know the value, I want to change my deal. He's like, you're backpedaling. And I was like, no, I'm really not backpedaling. I'll guarantee you at least $10 million more net of my fees. So I'll guarantee your $19 million offer. I can turn that into $29 million net of my fee, which in that case would be $3 million. Or you can pay me nothing and I'll get it closed for you. He said, okay, we put it in writing, signed an engagement agreement. We had 11 bidders. High bidder was $43.5 million. His bidder, the guy who bid 19, I called up the CEO and I was like, John, this is embarrassing. You were trying to steal this practice from this poor orthodontist. Where do you want to go? You don't want to leave 19 on the table, do you? He said, yeah, you're right. We'll raise it to 30 million. I'm like, that's not bad. A 5-minute call, I got the guy's bid raised from 19 million to $30 million. And I said, John, 30 million, you don't even get to come to dinner. You won't even be a finalist. He said, that's where we're going to end, 30 million. We ended up, we did 4 dinners. High bidder's 43.5 million. Under bidder is only 42.5 million. He took the $42.5 million group because they were right near a recap, and they could pay him 95% of that $42.5 million in cash, which is what he wanted. And so the transaction closed there. He got $23.5 million more than the $19 million offer he was about to sign, and he bitched about my $3 million fee. I'm like, doctor, I just got you an extra $20 million net after my fee, and you're gonna complain about my fee. He said, well, my financial advisor says that's too much. I said, tell your financial advisor that I doubled the value of your practice in about 3 months. Now, let's talk about the invisible DSOs becoming your friend or your foe. If you join one, they are going to be your friend. They are going to help you. Now, here's an example of where an invisible DSO cannot be your friend. We did a transaction probably 3 years ago now in a Midwest town of 100,000 people. There were 4 orthodontists in town total. And my client was the biggest orthodontist in town by far. Single doc practice. The year we partnered him with a group, he did $6.2 million in collections by himself out of 2 offices, and his average case fee was about $4,800. He took no Medicaid, he did very little Invisalign, and this guy worked 5.5 days a week. And I asked him, and his name's Sean, by the way. I said, Sean, I don't get it. I don't see that many doctors doing $6 million in collections by themselves. How do you do it? He says, it's pretty simple. I work 5.5 days a week. And I said, well, nobody else really does that. I can see that. He said, I grew up in a single wide trailer with a single mom, and I work 7 days a week, so this is like a vacation to me. So in his case, we got him over 4 times collections. And the good news was his new invisible DSO partner just happened to own the 5 pediatric practices in that town. And he had been getting 0 referrals from those 5 pediatric practices. And once that transaction was completed, as you can imagine, his practice doubled because he got 1,500 ortho case referrals from the pediatric practices that were owned by the invisible DSO that became his partner. Part of our deal in that was 2 things. One, we had to ensure and put in writing that we would deliver 2 associates that would start within 30 days of closing that transaction, which we were able to do. And he had to have a $15 million life policy, death and disability, to cover his bad drag racing habit. The buyer would not have done it without the life insurance policy, which he had to pay for. So let's talk about EBITDA. EBITDA is the basic metric upon which practices are valued. It is not the only metric upon which practices are valued. I have sold practices that had 0 EBITDA before, but EBITDA is a basic calculation of the cash flow or the net profit of your practice after subtracting taxes, interest, depreciation, and amortization. A lot of doctors will say, I don't want to do a deal now because my debt's so high and the interest expense is so high. I'm like, no, that does not factor into your EBITDA. It is excluded. The one thing that is included in EBITDA is the doctor's compensation. I get many doctors who call me up and go, hey, my accountant says my EBITDA is $1 million. And I'm like, fantastic, let's have a conversation. I said, oh, by the way, doc, when your CPA calculated your EBITDA, did he remember to pay you something to do what you do every day? Well, no, I don't think that's in there. I said, well, if you've got an orthodontic practice, the traditional compensation in orthodontics is that the doctor is going to receive a base salary of about $350,000 a year, and they're going to have some sort of case start incentive bonuses. And in every deal we've been doing since COVID, the doctor also has what's called an earn-out component that raises the price of the practice in the 1, 2, and sometimes 3 years after closing a transaction, which pays the doctor additional cash, fortunately at long-term capital gains tax rates. But the EBITDA calculation really is art, not science. Now, so I'll give you an example. There are 2, maybe 3 now of the invisible DSOs that are interested in orthodontic practices that will look at your cost of Invisalign versus their cost of Invisalign, and they will give you credit for that differential. So if you're paying $1,200 or $1,400 for Invisalign and they're paying $8 for Invisalign, when they calculate your EBITDA, they're going to give you credit for the fact that they buy Invisalign cheaper than you do. And there are all kinds of other ways that EBITDA is calculated by these prospective buyers, and we'll show you some examples here in a second. But it really is different. EBITDA is an art, not a science. So if you run into the doctor that says, yeah, well, I got 12 times EBITDA. And I'm like, that's great, doc. Who calculated the EBITDA? Well, the buyer did. And I'm like, well, now do you think they were calculating that EBITDA for your benefit or for their benefit? So the multiple of EBITDA is completely irrelevant. What really matters is, how do you calculate EBITDA? So a practice, for instance, that's not offering any benefits to its team members, when they partner with an invisible DSO, they're going to start offering benefits to all of their team members, and there's a cost associated with that. And there will be a hit to EBITDA because whoever partners with you is going to add the cost of benefits, and so that's going to reduce your future income. Another thing in ortho accounting that gets really interesting is they're going to be looking at your receivables. So we see doctors who have extraordinarily low receivables balances, they're going to get hit for that when it comes to purchase price. It's going to be a functional reduction in EBITDA and reduction in value. So the level of your receivables relative to your production and collections today is relevant when calculating value. So ortho accounting is more difficult than all other dental accounting, but it's interesting in how different these groups will calculate EBITDA. We're a believer in the theory, if you don't talk to at least 6 different prospective bidders, you're leaving money on the table. And I've got dozens of stories of doctors who have left money on the table, including some celebrity doctors that are not here today that you would know of. I believe that the orthodontic practices should look at all of their options. Some doctors say, no, I want to go to an ortho-only group because it's like-minded people. We're all thinking about ortho. That's great, but some of the ortho-only groups in the last 24 months have been kicked out of the game. Why? Ortho case starts dropped 8% last year. So if you were an ortho-only invisible DSO, you might not have been growing. And your creditors and your investors might have said, you know what, let's not partner with any more practices until case starts start going up again. And that has happened to multiple of the ortho-only invisible DSOs. And when they're not growing, they're not creating value for your equity. So it's important that you understand who your potential partner is. I happen to be a fan of the Trifecta invisible DSOs just because the proven exit value of the one that we helped create. But you should look at all of your options, whether it's ortho-only, whether it's Trifecta, or whether it's the multi-specialty groups. The multi-specialty groups are always eager to partner with orthodontists that are within communities where they may have 10, 12, or 30 GP practices. We did a deal for a multi-specialty group with an ortho client of ours in Phoenix. The multi-specialty group had over 30 offices that were not directly within referral distance of his practice, but pretty close. So that practice, after partnering with that particular multi-specialty invisible DSO, grew dramatically because the GPs now had somebody in the family that they could refer ortho to. So these are 2 recent examples. Remember, everybody says, 23 values are down, blah, blah, blah. Bidders are down. No, sorry, that's not true. These are 2 examples. Both of these deals signed in May. So take a look at, now this is a big practice, 12 million in collections. We had 18 qualified bidders. What's important about that one is look at the differential in how EBITDA was calculated by the buyers. That was not our calculation, that was the buyer's calculation. That's a big range. The other practice there, 13 qualified bidders, that one was a pedo practice. And look at the range of how EBITDA was calculated, again, by the buyers. Look at the ranges of the bids. That deal ended up trading at over 10 times EBITDA. And then look at the cash versus equity options that the doctor had. So he had the option to take anywhere from 51 to 80% of his practice value in cash. And what we typically find is that younger doctors want less cash and more equity because they have a longer practicing horizon to see the value of that equity increase over time. And in some cases, like my orthodontist who had the $19 million bid, he wanted 95% in cash, or he wanted as high a cash component as he could get, because he was 59 years old. He had been very clear with us up front, I'm going to work 3 years, not 5, period. Don't bring me a buyer who wants me to work 5, because I won't. Which was fine with him, or which was fine by us, because he had 4 great associates and 4 offices. His associates were all in their sub 45, let's call it. So he had the opportunity to do a deal and leave within 3 years. But calculation of EBITDA is art, not science. Here's a couple of more case studies. The top one there was actually a periodontist miracle. The case number 4 there in Michigan was actually a GP practice. in Michigan, and we had 9 bidders for this guy. That's a crazy number for a GP practice in Michigan, but when you get multiple people in the room that want a particular asset, the value to this doctor, to the winning bidder, was the fact that they had other practices nearby. This filled a hole in their coverage map, and so they paid up for it. Interesting case study number 5 was actually an orthodontic practice. This was a practice that was interesting because they had fallen for the belief that multiple offices increases value. The reality is that's not necessarily true. If multiple offices increases your profitability, then fantastic. But don't get hung up on the theory that to create maximum value for my practice, I have to have multiple offices. The highest value deal that we will do this year is for a single office practice. It's a big office, it's 29,000 square feet, but it's one office, and we'll do about a $44 million deal for them this year. So don't get hung up on you have to have multiple offices. If having multiple offices increases the profitability of your practice, you should do it. This particular doctor got 12 times EBITDA because his EBITDA was depressed because he had way too many offices that were underutilized and that were being used less than 2 days a week. Fortunately, the partner for him has done an exceptional job of marketing. Their view was, we can fix his lack of digital marketing. We can double the size of this practice in the next 2 years. So they were willing to pay up, and that's the highest value ortho deal we have done in 2 years. 12 times, it was a little over 12. Now, let's talk about earnouts. Earnouts are a topic. Are you guys all looking at me like I'm not supposed to be up here? It's bothering me. I mean, my clock says I got 19 minutes, but if I'm running too long, you got to tell me. Okay. All right, I don't want to be in trouble. I can get in trouble at home. All right, let's talk about COVID earnouts. COVID earnouts are really important for doctors who are growing, because what happened was during COVID, a lot of doctors said, you know what, we're not going to do anything until we get back to 2019 performance. So don't call us until we get back. So the buyers, or the invisible DSOs, said, no. We need to do deals now. So what we'll do is we will partner with the doctor based on his trailing 12-month numbers, which may have been depressed due to COVID. And what we'll do is we'll reprice the transaction 1 year after closing, 2 years after closing. And in the midst of the worst part of COVID, we did one deal where the doctor's transaction would be repriced 5 years after closing. So functionally, a COVID earnout is going to pay you for your performance after completing a transaction. So if you have a growing practice and you're going, no, I'm not going to do anything until my growth is plateaued. If you're planning to do a deal in the next 2 or 3 years, the COVID earnout will lock in today's high multiples at today's value and pay you for your growth in the 1, 2, and sometimes 3 years. 2 years is pretty much a layup. Practices where they say, we just started a new office, or I just hired a new associate, where they have sort of a longer ramp time, we can get them 3-year earnouts. But the earnouts are absolutely gold if you have a growing practice, because you're going to lock in today's values and get paid for the value that you create post-closing. This is a very simple example. $1 million practice, increased their EBITDA, and this was a 1-year earnout. This was a strange one. Increased the value of their practice by $200,000, or increased the EBITDA of their practice by $200,000 in the first year post-closing. So the doctor got the same multiple on the incremental increase in his EBITDA as he did in the initial transaction. This was actually a perio practice a couple of years ago. There really are no typical deals in this business. Every transaction is custom. We just did a deal for a doctor who said, hey, my son is in dental school, and I am hoping that he will get into ortho school, and therefore 3-4 years from now, he will be an ortho. I want to make sure he has a job here. Well, guess what? His son has an employment contract with the invisible DSO that he can join that practice whenever he's ready. So every one of these transactions is customized. We're doing a lot of transactions right now where you have multi-age doctor partners within a practice, and we're doing transactions so that the younger doctor can functionally buy out the elder doctor as a part of these deals. And everyone is very customized. Now, let's talk about timing. Timing is really important, and a lot of it is driven by the opportunities that are out there. So, great example. The winning bidder for the oral surgery practice that I had dinner with this week will be a trifecta practice. the Trifecta group, we have sold that group an ortho that is within referral distance of the oral surgery practice. But that group right now will pay an extraordinary value for a pediatric practice within referral distance. I did 2 deals for a pedo and an oral surgeon in Orlando, Florida. The buyer of that group, or the partner who took both of those guys, will pay a stupid amount of money today for practices in the central Florida area, let's call it, because he's trying to complete his dental trifecta. He would prefer that they be within referral distance of the pedo and the oral surgery practice that we got record values for, but he would be happy to do a deal like we did last year, where he would partner with an ortho practice that's somewhere in the region and then build a new ortho office within referral distance of the pedo and the oral surgeon, so that ortho is going to have guaranteed growth, and the Invisible DSO is happy to build that office and pay for it, but they're going to need the ortho to run that practice, staff it, and make it successful. So a lot of these transactions are dictated by things that are out of your control that you wouldn't understand, and a lot of it has to do with timing. So if you ever get a letter from me that says, hey, we're coming to your neighborhood because we have other clients there, we should talk because we can get you an extraordinary value. And in some cases, I mean, an ortho that's within referral distance of these pedos and oral surgeons in Orlando, they're going to get a 25% value premium. And our average deal value is about $8 million. So some doctor's got an $8 million transaction or an $8 million value practice. I can make it worth $10 million just because I know who the right buyer is at the right moment in time. So let's talk about ideal practice traits. We do not partner with or help doctors who don't have at least $500,000 in EBITDA. If you have less than that, let's talk, because we'll talk about a growth path to help you get there faster so that we can help you. One of the interesting metrics that's happening today is team turnover. They're very interested in what your team turnover is. Lower is better. Associates, all of these groups will create a path to ownership for your existing and future associates. Their whole business model is based on the theory that doctors in their partner practices should be owners for a whole long list of reasons, not to mention the fact that practices run by owner doctors make more money than practices run by employee doctors. Again, we talked about custom. Initial values, we talked about it, and I've got all these people looking at me, so I'm not going to be late. The highest value practices today are ones that are growing. Geography is less of an issue. Many of these groups post-COVID who pursued a specific geography like New England, let's say, they are now looking to expand. They want to broaden their geography to diversify their risk. 2 doctors is always better than 1, but it's not critical to value. You give me 1 young doctor who's very successful, we're going to be able to get a great value for that doctor. Real challenges to value, guys, are your costs are going up, and many of you are not raising your fees enough to cover those costs, and I get why. Because case starts are down, that's not the time to raise fees. It's a problem. But you're having pain in margins. Let's talk about taxes. Virtually every transaction that we do is an asset sale. And this is important. You are keeping the entity which currently owns your practice. That is the entity within which you have been executing, we'll call it your tax optimization strategies. Now, we all know what your tax optimization strategies are because I'm like the proctologist. I get to look at everybody's financials, and I can tell you pretty much everybody in the orthodontic business is executing tax optimization strategies through their practice, which is a nice way of saying their wife's on the payroll, their girlfriend's on the payroll, the kids are on the payroll, the dogs are on the payroll. I have an orthodontic client who has 9 horses on his payroll. We sold one last year who had 5 Ferraris on his payroll. So you can, when you keep the entity from which you are currently practicing your tax optimization strategies, you can potentially, depending on your CPA, continue those tax optimization strategies within that entity because you kept the entity, you only sold the assets. When you're considering partners, bigger is not necessarily better, smaller is not necessarily bad, but understanding who the capital is behind the partner that you choose is the most important thing. So states are important today. Now, I don't care what state you're in, you have a valuable practice. We have a bidder for all 50 states. There are some states that are higher value than others. Florida, Texas, Tennessee, Arizona, Idaho, Utah, Colorado right now are what I'll call the hot states. And that changes. Georgia used to be a hot state. It's not as hot as it was. Your personality in these transactions matters, right? So when I go to dinner with you with a potential buyer, if you are a boring doctor, it is gonna be tough for me to get you the highest value. And we're gonna coach you on that. Most commonly asked questions are freedom. Are they gonna tell me what to do, what supplies to use, schedule, et cetera? They're not. As far as what's going to change, there will be some things that will change. And you know what? We're gonna talk about those things that will change. Before you ever decide on a partner, we're going to talk about it with every prospective partner because it will impact who you choose as a partner. You want to know that. You're always going to do the hiring and firing with any of these groups. They're going to help you recruit, but they're not going to tell you who to hire and fire. We'll close with a couple of pointers here. If you own your own building, you have two great options. One, you're going to have a AAA credit tenant paying you rent for the next 15 years. And if you structure that lease right, the second option you're going to have is the ability to sell your real estate to one of the dozen real estate investment trusts that are eagerly paying very high values for practice real estate if it's occupied by an invisible DSO as the guarantor or the maker of the lease. Do it yourself. Guys, you don't want to do this, right? Whether you use us or you use somebody else, these transactions are too important to you to do it yourself. We like to say we're very unique in this because we don't get paid by buyers. Everybody else in this business gets paid by buyers, so we don't have a conflict of interest. Our sole goal is to get you the highest value that we can from the right partner. And that's why when you see our stats of the number of bidders that we have, our competitors don't have that many bidders because they only take you to the groups that will pay them a fee, which is less than a third of them. So don't do it yourself. This is a tip, make sure you do your lease right. Tax allocation is critical. And your associate contracts, believe it, past, current, and future are really important to these transactions. Just talked about that. And I will leave with veterinarian practice values. So a lot of doctors say to me, gee, is this the top in values? I'm like, I don't really know, but we can look at veterinary practices, which they have consolidated a similar rate to dental. And that's what the values have changed in veterinary practices recently. So I'm not saying that's going to happen to us, but it's something to pay attention to. So everybody in this room, I would love to do a practice valuation for you. It's free. So we have a conversation. We decide whether this is something of interest to you and you're the right size for us. We'll go through your numbers and we'll give you an idea of what's possible from a value of your practice. And we will do that for everybody, whether you're considering doing a deal now, next year, or 10 years from now. But it pays to understand the value of your practice because it changes and it'll at least give you something to think about. So please contact us, largepracticesales.com, and we would love to look at everybody's financials. Any questions I can answer? I love that, no questions.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you so much, you guys.
Appreciate it.
Chip, thank you for being here.
See you. How you doing?
Great. Excellent. Thank you, Chip, so much.